Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's another episode of the Top 100. Let's just get started. Number 30. There have been a ton of Souls games, as in games that take after the formula set out in Dark Souls over the past few years, but I feel like that Salt and Sanctuary is the only game that has gotten even remotely close to getting it right. The pacing of the combat, the overall quality of its theme and presentation, the level of secrecy to everything, the variety between all the different kinds of weapons and the bosses and just the general overworld. Despite the fact that it is a two-dimensional platformer with a couple of Metroidvania elements thrown in there for good measure, it maintains a sort of crown as being the best game to out-Souls Souls, or at least it gets really close to it. And I really appreciate it for managing to maintain everything that made the series great without taking it out in some weird direction like a couple of other games have been noted to do. These guys had pedigree, so they were very clearly capable of doing it. And don't worry, the difficulty is absolutely intact. I still haven't managed to finish it, so feel free to go and die and die and die again. Number 29.
I am ready to obey thee. Spin round like
The Tale of Sinbad and the Rocks.
shoot the left hand.
The theater awaits! Welcome to the theater of magic!
Pinball Arcade is the best pinball simulation I have ever played. It emulates real-world tables, so you don't get any of that sort of fancy stuff that you get included with Zen Pinball 2's fictional tables, but the game itself plays fantastically. The ball feels on point, the flippers feel great underneath the shoulder buttons, and their selection of real-world tables is wonderful. They have a bunch of the best older and newer tables available in the world, basically, and it is a really enjoyable time if you have all the tables. There's the big if, because unfortunately, due to licensing issues with the original table manufacturers, they actually had to take down most of the tables that actually made Pinball Arcade worth owning, and that is really disappointing to me because, well, there was Zen Pinball now, and while Zen Pinball does a decent job at emulating the ball physics and the flipper physics, it just doesn't feel anywhere near as good, as fluid, or as enjoyable as the Pinball Arcade, which is why the Pinball Arcade is here. So, I don't think they're ever going to get their former glory back, but for people who have access to all the original tables, Pinball Arcade will give you hours upon hours of fantastic pinball action, and it is definitely the one to recommend. Number 28. Rayman Origins is absolutely gorgeous. It is one of the best looking games on Vita, which is amazing considering that it came out literally on launch day, and it is the reason why people stick to the OLED so much, because games like Rayman Origins just pop. They are incredibly bright, colorful, fluid, and just look fantastic. But thankfully, it's also backed up by some really good platforming gameplay too. There's a ton of levels, a bunch of variety, lots of unlockables and secrets to find, and the overall platforming action itself is really smooth and just works great underneath the Vita's controls. There is also a sequel in the form of Rayman Legends. It is a sort of Crash Bandicoot 3 thing going on where they introduce a bunch of new control styles, and in my personal opinion it doesn't make the game any better, but at the same time they also include a bunch of the Rayman Origins levels but rebalanced to be a little bit easier, so it might also be the definitive version depending on whether or not you'd like massive amounts of variety over basic but otherwise really enjoyable platforming. Either way though, both games are absolutely stellar platformers. They are great revivals that have unfortunately not seen another follow-up, and there are very few games on the Vita that can match up to this in both pure platforming quality and artistic merit. Number 27. Before Souls came along, Ninja Gaiden, at least on the Xbox, was one of the best examples of three-dimensional action games with big bosses, lots of difficulty, and otherwise just smooth gameplay, and Sigma Plus is a fantastic port of that. It runs at a solid 30, the action is all there, all the content is there, tons of enemies to defeat and destroy, patterns to learn, and just general ass to be kicked. With that said though, there are one or two things about this port which are sucky, mainly the fact that they tend to make you use the motion controls in the touchscreen a little bit more often than one might like, but there are still plenty of big bosses, plenty of big levels to explore, weapons to create, and just general people to beat the ever-loving bejesus out of, and it is easy to recommend because of that. This also happens to be my most viewed video, like, consistently over the last, 9 to 12 months, and I have no idea why. Can someone please let me know? I mean, I know it's pretty high on this list, but I mean, geez, there are so many people watching this video for some reason. Number 26.
We have to stop. You don't understand.
There are two sides to Little Big Planet that you need to get absolutely right for it to work. The first side is its sense of childlike wonder, along the same lines as, say, Tearaway. And despite the fact that this game was not developed by Media Molecule, the people who came up with Little Big Planet in the first place, it still works really well. They got the controls dead on. The simple, floaty platforming works really great on the Vita. The campaign is short, but it definitely has that sense of imagination that only these sorts of games can have. There's plenty of little included mini-games that make use of the motion controls and the touchscreen and what have you, and Stephen Fry is voicing, because of course Stephen Fry is voicing. I would literally follow that man to the death if he was the Pied Piper. The second side of things is the level creation, in which you can create practically anything you like. Not just simple platforming levels, but practically full-on games as well. And there are plenty of those thanks to the fact that the creation tools are as fully fleshed as they are on the PlayStation 3, and they even had a few tricks that was new to the series at the time, like being able to save data between levels. Online, there are an absolute ton of great levels to play in both platforming and non-platforming varieties, and it goes to show just how powerful not only this game was, but the Vita was. It's going to be really unfortunate when the servers eventually shut down for Little Big Planet, because the game will lose a lot of what made it special, not to mention just the general quality of everything that was on that service. So if you have the opportunity when this video comes out to go and play some of those online levels, please do. There is a lot of good stuff there to find. Number 25.
鋼の翼旅立つ空に生まれた意味求め羽ばたく傷ついた体を駆り立てて縛られる魂の抱きさ終わりへ落ちるだけ鋼の体導きたどり歩む意味に出しさすらうここに刻むよ生きた証鼓動を祈り希望再び交わる言葉に切り裂いて
People might be surprised not to see BlazBlue on this list, but frankly, Under Night In-Birth EXE Latest, the mouthful of a name that is, happens to be the best. It is the most mechanically in-depth. It's got the best tutorial. Unfortunately, it doesn't have the best selection of modes, but of course, the fighting is there to make up for it. The amount of mechanics and moves and combos there are to learn is absolutely ridiculous. The game looks really good on the Vita, and the character selection, while smaller than, say, something like BlazBlue, is incredibly varied across the individuals. It's about time this series got the following that it deserved, mainly through showing up at EVO, but unfortunately it was a little bit too late to save the population of this Vita version. But it still happens to be the best fighting game on Vita by a significant margin, just due to its overall quality, polish, and just general gameplay. It's wonderful. If you're looking for the best fighting game on Vita, this'll do it, but beware, it is anime as hell. Number 24.
逃がすかランダムシュート
はやぶさを下ろせ。
航空隊は直ちに出撃せよ。
さてお客さんを出迎える。捕らえた。こいつを持ってけ。
This could never happen here in the West, and that's why I love it so much. Basically, take a bunch of individual big robot franchises and stuff them all together, and this is what you get. It's a strategy RPG where all the individual stories play out, and they all come together to attack some universe-ending threat, and it is as glorious as it sounds. The English translations do a great job of bringing forth the text while also not being a localization nightmare like the Moon Dwellers was. And the massive amount of content, there's like 60 stages in each of these, but there's like at least 3 unique story branches you can go down in each one to get a bunch of different units and put together your dream team of massive robots to go and fight whatever is going on. It'll have your favorite series, like I personally prefer V because it has Space Battleship Yamato in it, and I love Space Battleship Yamato, but X is just as interesting. It'll introduce you to new series as well that I need to go and watch at some point in the near future, and the stories themselves are really entertaining and enjoyable just due to the fact that you've got all these interesting characters coming together all at once, and that's what makes it great. So if you're looking for literally just everyone pile in, this is the one that you want to have a look at. Number 23. What if the people who made Dynasty Warriors took on the monster hunting genre. That is exactly what this game is. That is the easiest way to describe it. And it fills those shoes in spades. Kiwami and 2 are the same basic gameplay. You've got a bunch of different weapons, you've got a bunch of monsters to go and fight. Go fight them, please. There are plenty of like little systems going on around the outside to help boost you up. You have weapon crafting, you have resources to buy and sell, you have quests to do. But it's all the same basic thing, which is going and beating the crap out of monsters. And if you like Dynasty Warriors as just general beating the crap out of things gameplay, these games will also serve you nicely. Toukiden Kiwami was a bit more structured in the fact that it's got individual missions that you go out on. 2 is a little bit more freeform. You do have individual missions to go out on as well, but they give you a little bit of an open world to explore and things to go and fight in that as well. And that they're both perfectly fine. Picking either one is absolutely fine. They've all got a good variety in both monsters, weapons, and just general gameplay. So yeah, not the best hunting game on this list. We'll see that in about 2 videos, but still, it's a great pick up and just idly mash away while you're doing something else game, and they each have ridiculous amounts of longevity. Number 22. High-speed futuristic racing is Wipeout's forte, and Wipeout 2048, while it might have been the last hurrah from the studio that originally birthed the franchise, is still a fantastic example of it. It's really well balanced, really enjoyable, super high speeds, plenty of stuff to do, and it is immensely enjoyable flying past buildings at 600, 700 kph. And it looks great too. It still remains one of the best looking games on Vita to this day, and it still runs pretty well as well. Sure, it gets beaten out by the fact that there's a HD collection with it on PlayStation 4 now, but the Vita version still maintains its playability quite nicely. This isn't even beginning to mention the fact that they ported over the entirety of HD and HD Fury to the Vita. All the tracks, all the challenges, all the basically everything except the multiplayer. And they work just as well as the base game. So you have hours upon hours upon hours of grinding against a specific track, learning every individual corner, learning every individual boost pad, trying to get just that one last millisecond off your time in order to get that gold medal, and it is immensely satisfying when you finally do. So it comes highly recommended for those of you who really want a good high-speed racing challenge. Number 21. The Binding of Isaac was one of the first games to popularize the idea of the roguelike mechanical formula, with permadeath, randomized runs, and a bunch of stuff to make going through those randomized runs all the more enjoyable. Not to mention being hard as balls to encourage you to continue on those randomized runs. And despite the fact that it was one of the first ones, it still manages to be one of the best. The gameplay is fantastic. There are a ton of individual items that can influence even the slightest amount of shooting or moving or even just playing the character in some way. There are tons of enemies and lots of bosses to fight, so the game's got plenty of variety. There's an absolute smorgasbord of unlockables and content, and it runs relatively well on the Vita. It doesn't run the best, but it runs more than well enough to make it work. And it is the only game I have ever played that looks like this. It is gory, it is brutal, its overall theme of things along the lines of everything between your place in the universe to parental abuse to God knows what else Edmund McMillen stuffed inside this game, but it still manages to be one of the most unique concepts and games that has been invented in the past 10 years. The only downside to the Vita versions is that we never got the expansions Afterbirth, Afterbirth Plus, and I'm assuming Repentance when that eventually comes out. With that said though, you've still got hundreds upon hundreds of hours of good hard content to sink your teeth into here, and it easily comes as a recommend. Well, I promised a bonus section talking about how things will run down, and well, here it is. So, right now, things are getting interesting because we are currently in the middle of multiple server shutdowns. There are games that are losing their online and disappearing from the store constantly. And that makes it kind of hard to be prepared for things like certain goes like that, because there are multiple digital-only games on the store, and when they start going down, it's going to be a problem. We've already lost a fair few of them. The two that come to mind are Plants vs. Zombies and Duke Nukem 3D Megaton Edition, because, well, they're gone. You just can't buy them anymore for multiple reasons, although I believe in both those cases they were actually licensing issues. But we've already got games that are going down in some form or another. We've already lost many of the online-only ones, especially games along the lines of like free-to-play ones, because they just never picked up on the Vita. Again, see my talk about Destiny of Spirits back a couple of videos ago, but still. The way things are going to round down is that we're going to start losing online servers for the more popular games. We haven't lost them for things like Killzone Mercenary or Little Big Planet, or things along the lines of Call of Duty Black Ops Declassified just yet, but trust me, in the next 6 months or so, those are coming. There is no way that they are going to resist the spotlight forever. Thankfully, the Vita kind of had this weird advantage, despite the fact that it didn't really have that much in the way of multiplayer games. I mean, like, sure, you had things like Wipeout and like things like Toukiden and stuff like that, but you never had games that were overwhelmingly reliant on their multiplayer components. So thankfully, the majority of these games will remain playable as they go down, but as the servers start to disappear, the games might start to disappear as well, especially certain licensed titles. Like, I can see titles like Extreme Versus Force disappearing from the store in the next couple of years, and there are obviously games that are going to be impossible to find shortly, like Super Robot Wars V and X, which I talked about in this video, are also going to get harder to find because, well, you weren't able to get them over here in the first place. You had to import them, and I'm going to hold on to those cartridges for dear life. But once the servers are gone, it won't be long for the games to start following, because the thing is, there are a fair few games that are licensed, and eventually the developers are going to find no reason to continue the licensing. And there are some games that this has happened with, and my favorite example is Shinobito 2, because Shinobito 2 was published by Bandai Namco Games, and they took it down after a 5-year period because they just didn't think it was worth the effort to relicense it. And to be fair, I don't blame them, because not many people know about Shinobito 2 other than channels like me who have played it and understand its gloriousness, as you would know if you watched the last video. With all of that said though, let's just summarize real quick. We're going to start losing servers. We already have. And the bigger ones like Killzone Mercenary and Toukiden and what have you, they might last another 6 months to a year, but they are going to go down eventually, and it's going to be quite unfortunate for them. After that, we're going to start losing the games. We're going to lose things along the lines of games that are running out of their licensing agreements, and we're going to lose games that people just don't want to put on the effort to maintain anymore. And most games are going to stick around, admittedly. There's going to be a few that are going to be around until the end of bloody time, but as for when Sony plans on shutting down the digital store altogether, well, that's a really tough question to answer, because the Vita has been shown by Sony to have not anywhere near as much care as another platform. We know that shops like the PlayStation 3 store are still up, but the PSP store is long gone, and we don't know how long it's going to be until they shut down the Vita store, and when they do, we are going to lose a ton of the games that were originally download only, and that is going to be majorly depressing. Thankfully, the hackers have already figured this one out. If you aren't aware, piracy is a thing on the Vita now, and they have got that 110% working, and by the time this video is out, there's going to be so little money left to be made on the Vita that I'm not massively opposed to people setting it all up and getting it all ready, because Eventually, things are just going to start disappearing like clockwork, and there's going to be no other way to play them on the Vita, except for the fancy sets of hacks that we've got going on. As always, piracy ends up being the thing that saves the games the most, because we wouldn't have anywhere near the complete collections of games that we do, from anything from the Nintendo Entertainment System down to weird mobile platforms like the N-Gage, down to things like, you know, even the most obscure of consoles, if it wasn't for the pirates coming along and thinking, how can I back this up? With that said though, if you want something on the Vita, now's the time to get it. We don't know when they're going to start with the mass takedowns. We don't know when they're going to start with the server shutdowns. We don't know when they're going to actually shut down the store entirely. But if it were me, I wouldn't bet on it lasting 2 more years. We don't even know if there are any games coming out in 2020, I apologize, that aren't Utawara Ramono, and that's going to be super early on in the year. So don't hold your breath and be ready for it, and don't be surprised when it does come along. That's your warning. As for what I plan on doing, well, considering that I own literally 95% of the PlayStation Vita store digitally, I feel perfectly justified in grabbing a second Vita, hacking it to high heaven, finding the biggest storage possible, and sticking all of my games on there and riding out the storm that way personally. So, yeah. That's pretty much it for me this time around. Next time we'll be talking about replacing the Vita with the only handheld console that's really out there, and that would be the Switch. So, yeah, we'll talk about it. I'm not going to say it's a definite yes or no yet, because that would be spoilers. This has been BlueMaxima, and I will see you all next time.